Hi, algebra students, and it is good to sort of see you again. I am getting ready to do 9.8, which will finish up chapter 9 for us. So if you're putting all the math together, then you should realize that probably sometime next week we will have a test, or actually it might be the following week. I have some review packets that I'm going to have you do next week. And we will set up a Zoom tutoring for those who are struggling, or just kind of a review session if you want to do that. And then we'll have the test for this chapter and be ready to move on to chapter 10. Our goal really for the year was to get up into chapter 11, not necessarily to finish it. So we're very close to meeting that goal, even though we've had this time apart. You guys have seemed to do really well with the material. So we're going to continue to talk about quadratic graphing. This time, though, we are going to be looking at inequalities. And really the only thing that we are doing that's different is the shading piece. All of the graphing should be review. So I'm going, just as a matter of review, we are going to go through and we're going to graph and get our parabola on the graph, and then we're going to figure out how to shade it. So I want you to take a look at example number 1 on page 547 if you haven't already opened up to that. And we have x squared minus 3x minus 3. And just as a review, we are going to be going through all of the necessary steps to get this up on the graph. So the first step that we have to do is to figure out our A, our B, and our C. So A is 1, B is negative 3, and C is negative 3 as well. Then once we have gotten the A, B, and C, we can do the vertex. And so we will do that, and that is negative B over 2A. So if we have the negative 3 and a negative B, that's going to make it positive. And then 2 times 1 is 2. So our vertex is 3 over 2, or 1.5. So that means if this were 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, the half mark is here. So our line is going to be running down through there, if you can see that. The next thing we want to do is our table of graphs. Now, they're not actually taking you through those steps. I am, just for review. So our table of values is the next thing we want to do. And remember, we want to put this one in the middle. And then we'll probably do 2 and 3, because remember this is 1.5. I'm going to do 1 and 0. Now, I just don't love working with the fractions. So we'll do all of these and try to figure out where that 3 over 2 is going to land. I always like to start with the 0. So if I put 0 in there and 0 in there, I'm left with negative 3. 1, I'm going to have 1 minus 3 times 1. So 1 minus 3 is going to be negative 2 minus 3, negative 5. 2, I'm going to skip this for right now. 2 is going to be 4 minus 6, and that's going to be negative 2 minus 3. There's our negative 5. So we're starting to see the mirror images. And then we put 3 in. So I'm going to have 9 minus 9, and that's going to leave me with the negative 3. And then the bottom point for this equation looks to be somewhere around negative 5. It's a fractional, so we're going to put like negative 5.5. I'm not going to waste the time going through the math for that. But we get the parabola, and then You can look online, or not look online, look in your book to see what the graph for this is going to look like. And you can tell where it's crossing the x-axis, because remember, our goal is to find where we cross the x-axis. That's one of our goals, to find where it crosses the x-axis. We also have a goal with inequalities to find out which points in an inequality, which points, the ones inside or the ones outside, would work in this equation. So they've pointed out a couple of points here. They have two that sit inside and they have one that sits outside. And if you put those into the inequality, some of them are going to work and some of them aren't. And that's how you know whether you shade on the inside or the outside. So let's go over to page, so this was a review. How do we get it on the graph? Let's take a look at page 548, and we want to take a look at the blue box. More as a reminder than anything else. But our blue box is giving us the information on both how to get this on a graph and then how to know where you shade. So to sketch the graph of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, and then sketch a dashed parabola for inequalities with the less than or the greater than sign, and for those that have the equal sign added, it's going to be a solid line. So this is exactly the same as our graphing our lines. Remember, if you had an inequality and it was just greater than or less than, it got a dashed line. But if it had the equal sign with it, then it gets the solid line. And what you're going to do after that is test a point on the inside or the outside. And you know how much I love to do 0, 0. And so if you can do the 0, 0, that's actually a quick and easy figuring out where I shade. So we're going to go through example number 1, and we're going to get that on the graph. And I think you're going to see that you already know how to do a lot of this, and it's just that inequality piece that we're adding to it. So our equation or inequality is y is less than, so here's where that pops back into our lives again, 2x squared minus 3x. And for all practical purposes, I like to have the fourth component. So if there isn't anything there, I add in the 0, just to make it a little bit easier for us to work. And then we would get this graph sketch. We would do all the same steps. Now I'm not going to, well, yeah, I'll go ahead and do the steps. So just to remind you, the A, B, and C. So A is 2, B is -3, and C is 0. And so then we go through and we find out the B, -b over 2a, which means I'm going to have 3 over 4. I've got another fractional piece, so that's going to be a little bit complicated. But it already tells us that the vertex is about 3/4. Then we would go through this part. And I'm going to put my 3/4 right here. 1, 2, and then 0, -1. I'm going to go through and find out my values. So when I put 0 in, because of this, it's 0. The -1 is going to give me 2 plus 3, so that's going to give me 5. The 1 is going to give me 2 minus 3, so it's going to be -1. And the 2 is going to give me 8 minus 6, or 2. Now, I'm not seeing any mirror images here, so I'd have to keep going. But I am going to go ahead and plot some points here. And Ignore the ringing that you hear. So -1, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, somewhere up around here. 3/4, and the bottom point is -1. So somewhere around here. 1, -1. Actually, it's probably supposed to be a little bit lower. And then 2, and 2 is going to be up here. Now let me erase all this other stuff so that we can clearly see these points. And so we started off, so here are my points. I don't have the mirror images, so it's hard to get it all on, but you can look at the graph on there. This has to be a dotted line. And so there's my dotted line. Now this one I am not going to make solid. I just keep it dotted. But what I have to figure out, and that means that solutions could be on this line. But what I have to figure out is a point. And if the point works with this, then it would mean that, that I shade on the outside or the inside. So I'm going to try the inside first. And here's a nice, if I go over 1, up 1, there's my point. I don't know if you can see my little question mark there. So 1, 1. So if I put 1, 1 into this, it would be 1 is less than, and then that would be 1. So 2 minus 3 times 1. 2 minus 3 would be -1 plus 0, and I would have -1. So I have 1 is less than -1. Well, is that a true statement? Now, if you're saying it's a true statement, then we need to go all the way back to the beginning of the book and start over. But if you say, well, no, that's not a true statement, 1 is not less than -1, that means that nothing on the inside will work. So then what we want to try to do is something on the outside. So let's try, let's see, 1, 2, let's try 3, 1. That's pretty clearly, hopefully that one will work. Hopefully I went over far enough. So 3 and 1, that's the point. And I want to know, is that one going to work? So I'm going to plug everything in. And I'm going to have 1 is less than, and I'm going to go through and do my math. 3 times 3 is 9, times 2, that's 18. Minus 9, 3 times 3, is going to be 9. Well, is 9 greater than 1? Yes, it is. And that is what tells you where to shade. This worked on the outside, so I'm now going to shade everything. And this is where you might want to get those nice colored pencils out. Again. So I'm going to shade everything on the outside. So this inequality works just the same way as when we were doing linear inequalities. You were looking for where the solutions worked. The solutions inside did not work on this. The solutions on the outside, though, do work. So let's do one more, and hopefully you'll understand this concept. We don't spend a whole lot of time on it, but I do want you to understand that inequalities work just the way as, parabola inequalities, quadratic inequalities work just the same way as linear inequalities. So I want you to take a minute, and I want you to try number 4 of the checkpoints on page 549. So number 4, I want you to pause the video. I want you to do the inequality and then come back and to tell me whether you are shading on the inside or the outside? I feel pretty confident that you can probably graph these right now, but we are going to do the whole thing. So go ahead and pause and work on that, and then we're going to come back and do number 4. And again, that's on page 549. Now, if you remember, one of the steps that we have talked about earlier in the week is that you want to make sure that you've written your equation correctly. And so hopefully I've done that, but you should always check both your own work and mine just to make sure that everything's written as it should be here. The next step that we want to take, and if we were in class, I would say, okay, what's the next step we need to take? And everybody would yell out, hopefully, finding A, B, and C. So we're going to do that. And hopefully you recognize now that our A is here, our B is here, and our C is here. So whatever number is in front of the variable and the one that's all by itself. So A is 1, B is 2, and C is 2. The next step, we want to find out where that line is that's cutting down through that parabola, the vertex. Hopefully you know that terminology. So we're going to do negative B over 2A. So I have 1 is going to go down here. And then the B is going to be negative 2. So I'm going to have a negative 1 vertex. So that means that the vertex is running down through here. That's where my vertex is going to be. Now I want to do my table of values. And I'm going to put my negative 1 in the middle. And then I'll go up to 0, 1, negative 2, negative 3. Then I just start plugging those points in. So step 1, step 2, step 3. You should understand those by now. So I put the 0 in, I'm going to get a 2. I put 1 in, I'm going to get 1 plus 2, and then 2 times 1 is 2. 1 plus 2, that's going to be 3, plus 2, I'm going to have 5. Then I'm going to stick the negative 1 in, and have 1 minus 2, which is a negative 1 plus 2, and that's 1. Then I'm going to put negative 2, so I'm going to have 4, but minus 4. So that's going to be 0, and I'm left with 2. Here's where I start to see my symmetry. And then I'll put negative 3 in. So I've got 9, and then minus 6, that's going to be 3, plus 2 is 5. So there I've got my symmetrical thing going on. All right, let's erase a little bit. And the negative 1, 1 is going to be right there. 0, 2, 1, 2, 1 and 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and negative 2 and 2, and negative 3 and 5. Now, one thing that you should notice on here, actually I think I've done something wrong here. So again, you should go back and take a look and see what I possibly did wrong, because my graph looks different from theirs. There, let's see what I did with the negative 1. So 1 minus 2 is going to be negative 1 plus 2 should be 1. So you guys could go do this problem and try to figure out what I did wrong. I'm going to go ahead and finish it though. The dotted line, remember you get extra credit when you're able to figure it out. So there's the dotted line. And then the next thing we want to figure out is where, oh, I'm sorry, this is number 4, isn't it? Yes. So this is, I'm sorry, this is correct. I was actually looking at the example. And what I wanted you to notice is that in this quadratic, the goal in life that we have, we can't meet because it doesn't cross the x-axis. So I think, remember what I told you earlier in this chapter is that we're looking for where it crosses the x-axis, but it won't always cross the x-axis. So these are obviously above the x-axis. So that's one of our goals in life. Another goal in life, though, is to know where we shade. So we want to find points. So I'm going to do my 0, 0 because it is obviously well below this. So if I stick in 0 and 0 and I have 0 is less than 2, is that a correct statement? Well, it is a correct statement. That means I'm going to shade everything around here. Now, I still have my cute little face. I still have my little eyes, and I can make ears, and I have his little smile. The only difference is that he is not crossing the x-axis. So if I said, what are the 2 points where it crosses the x-axis, you would not be able to give me an answer. There would be no solution. So I want you to remember that piece. There is no solution if it doesn't cross the x-axis. However, this shading is what I'm looking for here. So I'm sorry about that. I thought we were doing one of the examples, and my graph was very much wrong from that example. But this is correct. There's not an error in there that you need to go find. So what I want you to do is the homework for this section, and I wrote down that you are supposed to circle or write down any questions that you have, and those will be homework, and let me know what those are. I think I even said text me with those questions. Send me an email, and those are going to be the problems that we work on the board on Monday. So you can, even if you circle them really big and write problems with this and just upload it to the Dropbox, I should be able to see them as well. But what I really want to do now is start addressing the concerns that you have and the problems that you're having before we take a test on this. So remember, we're going to go over homework problems. We're going to be doing some review in class. It's really hard to do review without you in front of me, but I'm going to try. We're going to just do samples. And then we will look to have a Zoom session probably next Wednesday or Thursday. I just need to check and see when are good times to do that. And that's not required. And then you will have the chapter test to take probably the end of next week. And then we'll see how well that goes. We may do a little bit of review. Then we'll be moving into chapter 10. So don't forget, let me know the questions that you're having issues with. We'll work on those first thing, and I will see you next week.